Alright, it is now day 503 of non-stop Counter-Strike action. The walls are starting to speak and flashbang to me. I can't tell what's real and what's not, and all I hope is that Spirit and G2 still don't find a way to mess things up. We're in the middle of the last of the EU RMRs right now, so we're about halfway through, so it's time to take a look and see how things are going in the B division, and yeah, it's been chaos. While I had hoped that such strong teams as G2, Team Spirit, and Heroic would be able to stay consistent enough to make this a relatively easy process, it turns out when you fill an RMR with all of the most random and inconsistent teams in the top 10, fill it with a bunch of young, hopeful teams from Tier 2, you create a lot of chaos, and that's what we've been watching play out. And on top of it, the fact that Valve came out of nowhere to slam dunk a rule change in the middle of the goddamn major, then yeah, things are getting a little bit weird, so we're going to talk about it all so that you're ready for the conclusion of the RMR section of the major proceedings. So let's not waste any more time. Make sure you guys take a second, leave a like, and leave a comment down below, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. It helps out immensely in the YouTube algorithm. I will be streaming tonight at 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, co-streaming more major games. Again, against my better judgment, my therapist is telling me to stop, but I will not stop because I do it for you guys, and that's what really matters. So if you want to come see me live, you can do so at LionHeartZ CS2 over on Twitch, link in the description down below, 8 o'clock. Without any further ado, let's be mad at Valve. So, like I said, before we get into some of these games, we have to talk about this huge rule update because Valve have decided to pretty much mess everything up before we get ready for the major proper. In a bombshell statement today released by Perfect World, it has been cleared up that all invites straight to the elimination stage will now be decided by the Valve ranking system, and all 4th place decider matches in EU RMR A and B are now no longer going to happen or have had their results annulled. So what the hell does all of that mean? Well, in short, Perfect World were operating a system where the top 4 teams from each of the 2 EU RMRs would advance straight to the elimination stage, and that 4th place specifically would be decided by whoever tied up 4th and 5th place in a decider best of 3. In the first RMR, that was between Cloud9 and FaZe, if you remember from my coverage here on the channel, and that has yet to also be done in the RMR B. The big deal here is that in the A RMR, the top 4 teams at that event who won were the 4 highest rated teams in the field. So it doesn't really change anything in that regard, but in this RMR, we've had a shocking amount of upsets due to how inconsistent these teams are. In 1st and 2nd place, teams that would have literally yesterday been allowed to go straight to the elimination of the major, literally top 16 of the major guaranteed, were Team 3D Max and Big. And now, in the middle of the goddamn tournament, these teams have been deprived of that opportunity going forward because they are tier 2 teams. They do not rank very highly within the Valve ranking system, therefore they would not actually qualify if teams like G2, Spirit, Heroic, Eternal Fire, teams we expect to make it through the RMR unless something really goes wrong, they would take those spots because they're higher ranked in the Valve system than 3D Max and Big. So again, despite Big and 3D Max having the better record, being the 2-3-0 teams who were better than all of their opponents, they are no longer going to be rewarded as such. Obviously, this is an absolute goddamn nightmare. Valve changing the rules in the middle of the event is asinine. And listen, we're going into next year where RMRs are no longer going to exist. The system that Valve are trying to put in place make much more sense with the knowledge that there will be no major qualifiers. It will just be the top 32 teams in the rankings go into an expanded major format. But right now, why is Valve coming out of its dragon's nest of gold to ruin things that are going on right now? It makes no sense. Stepping over Perfect World, changing the rules in the middle of the event, everything about it feels bad. It's all a goddamn mess. And most of all, we all feel bad for 3D Max and Big, who played really good at this RMR. 3D Max especially beat some really good teams to get where they are. Another team we're going to talk about later in this video, Passion UA, who were a borderline brand new roster, one of the youngest rosters I have seen in a tier 1 event, were threatening to go 3-0 against Big. If they had won, they also would have been deprived, which would have been an even bigger travesty. The whole situation's a mess, and I can't believe Valve have done something like this. Normally, I'm pretty on Valve's side with most of the decision making, but this just reads as they don't communicate or interact with the esports world. They just come out of their giant throne, and hand down the decree, and we must live with it hell or high water, and it just sucks. Anyways, I thought about making a separate video on this, but I don't really have much more thoughts, so I'm just throwing it here in the beginning. If you were waiting for the recap, congrats, it starts now. Let's talk about what's happened over the first 2 days of this RMR and set the stage for the rest of it. So, just like the other RMRs, we have a lot of best of ones. Let's go ahead and knock those out first. We kicked off the event with Spirit eviscerating Bait on Dust 2, 13-1, literally nothing else to say except donk, and a little bit of Shiro, but mostly donk. No surprise there from Spirit, though don't worry, they do come back to disappoint us in just a little bit. Speaking of disappointments, we have future disappointments G2 and current disappointments NIP in our second game. G2 handled this pretty solidly, 13-7, pretty much a gentleman's sweep. There was a 10-2 first half for G2 on the CT side. Malbs was doing Malbs things on the CT side. Nico looked good, Hunter looked good. Muzzy really didn't have to do anything, and of course Snax is just along for the ride. And of course NIP are a train wreck circus that's on fire, and it just exploded. And our first top team to wear the clown nose of shame is of course nobody else than my favorite team in the world, Virtus.pro. They lost an overtime game on Mirage to Passion UA. Passion UA, I'm sure you've heard of from such hot tournament appearances as... Oh, wait, they haven't played any tournaments before? Oh. Okay, first things first before we get to the Passion guys. Electronic, 13-20? Electronic? Against two 17-year-olds? Two literal minors? And this is what you put up. Say it with me, guys. What is electronic? He's a bum! That's right. Can I get that one more time? What is electronic? He's a bum! Yes, very good. Electronic is a bum. Wasted a goddamn rare masterclass from Jame. 31 kills out of Jame. And Virtus.pro still loses. Now, the Passion guys are a really interesting project, and I want to give them much more time later on when we get to the best of 3 section. But in short, realize these guys have been boot camping, playing in privates for almost 8 months. This is for many of them their first LAN tournament. The average age of this team is 21 and a half. Again, two 17-year-olds, a 19-year-old, and then I think it's Jumbo or Jacasmo who is 24. This team is green as grass. But something about it, man, they play really interesting Counter-Strike. They're not just like firing on all cylinders, doing dumb pushes and succeeding that way. They do have a good system because they've been playing together for an extended period of time. It's a really interesting concept to see a team come up from an extended boot camp like this, and this be their first major appearance, no pun intended, and they played out of their minds. Zerofix looks really good. Jacasmo as well. Chilla has had great moments in a couple of series, and Fear seems like a pretty decent in-game leader. Honestly, props to him, dude. What a cool run so far. I only hope they continue to do well in their following best of 3s and make it to the major. I'd like to see them play more. Next up, we had Eternal Fire taking on Aurora, and Eternal Fire are a team that I always think is in the hunt of doing something great. They just have that kind of potential because of their personnel, but like many other teams in this field, they are a complete dice roll. Thankfully, in this warm-up here on Dust 2, they've rolled 6s, but again, they're also like a Dust 2 specialist kind of team. They always have been, so I don't know how much to read into that, especially when you consider that Zontaras wasn't that good, Woxic was only okay, and Calyx and Major were your top fraggers. That's just, you know, not really something you want to bet on. For Aurora, they exist. You know, we talk a lot about young up-and-coming Russian teams all the time, but I'm not really seeing much out of these guys in terms of that kind of promise. Next up, we had Heroic taking on Paravision, another team that I really am expecting big things out of in Heroic. They get off to a good start here, taking care of Paravision really quickly, 13-8 on Ancient. It was definitely a close first half, but Heroic's T-side was really, really good. You had Nerds and Tesses leading the way, Kicksand calling some good T-side strats. Dexter really wasn't involved in this one, but honestly, they didn't really need him, so I'm not really going to hold that against him. For Paravision are just a bunch of Spirit and Cloud9 rejects. I mean, it's Kickard and Art Frost, bro. Like, enough said. Speaking of sad, we have Astralis taking on 9 Pandas. Astralis started off their major bid with a loss on Nuke to the 9 Pandas, who are a roster, again, of who and what and where and why, nowhere near their roster from last major. And, you know, I can't be critical of Astralis. I want to, as a true pure hater, do it. But Cadian is still recovering from an arm injury. Device obviously couldn't show up to the event, which is really unfortunate, because I think they would have done well if he was here. Bro was coming back off the bench from being on life support for the last few months, suffering from a deadly unknown illness. And hey, he played good in this game, and he hasn't been bad. But, you know, I guess they hit him with the super soldier serum or something. You know, Stown, Stare, and Yabby, they have their moments. It's just hard for me to be critical of them when they're not playing with their true roster, so I won't. They lost here 13-9, but I mean, they do better later on, so I guess it's okay. After that, we had Big taking on Sashi. Sashi were a team that were not on my radar whatsoever, and we'll talk more about them in a little bit. But honestly, this is another, you know, kind of lower tier Danish roster that showed some interesting stuff. Definitely some good aspects, especially in later series against Virtus.pro. Here, they battled Big pretty deeply and ended up being a 13-9 affair in the favor of Big. And at the end of the day, Big are a team that it's very hard for me to be excited about. I keep expecting Tabson to be really good. I keep being in the headspace of when Tabson was a top 20, top 15 player, you know, one of the better riflers in the world. And then I remember that was like 2018, 2019. You know, he's just not the same guy anymore. And I do have a lot of respect for it being an all-German roster and continuing to try and make that work. But at the end of the day, you know, listen, to their credit, they go 3-0 here. I do think a lot of that is bracket-oriented, to be honest. They played good here. Searson looked good. Tabson looked good, all things considered. And I think the Rigon move has been mostly positive. It's just not a roster that excites me. And lastly, in our first round of best of ones, we had 3D Max taking on TSM. TSM with all of the would-be next Danish stars of yesteryear, including such hot names as Valde, Acor, Nico. But not that Nico. That Nico. Was MSL coaching this team? It really sucks that TSM is such a cool organization and they're stuck with these guys. No offense to these guys. No offense to these players. All nice guys. But, mid. As in team solo mid. That's what they are. For 3D Max, this is a classic case of a French roster catching pure gasoline in a bottle. And if you're not familiar with that, when the French get hot, they run you over. Lucky is like the top rated player at this event by a country mile. He's playing out of his gourd. And off the backs of that, they are steamrolling the competition. More on that in just a little bit. But a good start here, 13-11 win on Vertigo. Pretty tough, but Vertigo is such a scrappy map, I'm not going to hold it against them. TSM, for all my insulting, did play some very solid rounds. But again, Lucky, Dejoko, they were going in. Alright, now we've laid the land out here, I'm going to speed through the rest of the best of one results so we can get to our first best of threes. So bear with me here, I'm going to be shouting scores at you for a second like I'm a caster if you're that guy on Reddit. Alright, in the second round, we open up with Spirit losing to Passion UA 13-11. And nothing short of the classic Spirit torture chamber where Shiro and Donk are amazing, Zontix does his job, he is not the problem, but they are dragging two millstones around their necks in the name of Magix and Chopper, who can't do anything of value, and Chopper is just not a good endgame leader, and I'm getting so frustrated that Donk, Shiro, and Zontix just have to be so incredible. And for them to win, they have to go out of their way to make the rest of this team look good when so many of the best teams in the world have complete rosters, which is a foreign concept to Spirit apparently. Fair play to Passion though. They've played great, a really exciting young team. More on them in just a minute. We then had a game of all time, NIP taking on Paravision overtime. NIP did squeak out a win 16-12. Congrats to them for at least winning a game. That's more than we expected. Aurora beat Bait 13-9. G2 had a tough overtime victory over the 9 Pandas 16-13. Astralis fall to 0-2, losing to Sashi 13-11. 3D Max with a double overtime win over Eternal Fire 19-16. Virtus.pro squeak out a win against TSM 13-10. Big dominate Heroic 13-8. Virtus.pro with yet another win in the third round, 13-10 over 9 Pandas. Spirit once again dunk on Aurora, no surprise there, 13-7. Heroic take care of NIP because they're bad, 13-5. And then Sashi upsets Eternal Fire in our final best of one, 13-7. I watched this game live. I was really impressed by Sashi down the stretch on the CT side. They had some really cool clutch plays out of players like Cabby. And what else are you going to say other than Calyx and Woxic were terrible in this game, and Zontaras wasn't like out of his mind good. He was just kind of okay. And on the T side, he had a lot of rounds where he got caught up by utility. A tough loss for Eternal Fire, but such is the Eternal Fire paradox. Much like Team Spirit, they need so much to go right, and it just hurts because their team is so fun when it does go right. And all that leaves us is the good shit for the rest of this video, our first set of best of threes, our 2 3-0 advancement games, and our first set of elimination games. Starting off, we had an absolute banger, Passion UA versus Big, and now we can take a second and talk about Passion UA in a bit more detail, because they start off this series with a very strong win on Anubis, an emphatic win even, 13-9, with Chilla leading the way with 24 kills. Big continued to try and posture to him at the A site, and over again he was mowing them down. Big had a really good streak of rounds towards the end of the first half, but even though they won the second half pistol, Passion had a really great force buy win on the round after, and then flipped that into 6 straight rounds to take an emphatic lead before Big could really establish themselves on the CT side. And the big deal for Passion here is that they got enough rounds on the CT side. We all know how Anubis works. As long as you can just not bleed out too much on an opening CT half, the game is always on in the second if you can run up some good T rounds. They had really good rotates around the T map. They played really well around intel on A and mid. They definitely had some mistakes where they let like Searson drop on them from window in some rounds. You know, they definitely have a little bit of young team nerves. I think that's pretty obvious. But all in all, they played really well as a team. I thought Fear called really effectively, and then Jambo came alive in the second half to really lead the way behind Chilla, who was still quite good himself. All in all, kind of a slow and middling start for Big. I really thought the Passion were going to be on for a potential 2-0 here. The problem is that Big, throughout pretty much their entire time of existence as far as I can remember, have always been Dust 2 merchants. The Germans and the French, they love Dust 2. And on the second map, Big ran Passion over to the tune of 13-5. And this is where I think we see the fact that Passion have never played a LAN before, because they looked nervy. They looked like they were trying to get a win that they weren't confident they could pull over, and they stopped playing as well as a unit. A big thing here, Chilla, Jacasmo, Zerofix, these guys are some of their best players in most of their games, and they went totally missing on this Dust 2. Meanwhile, Crimbo, Searson, Tabson were just very effective on the T side, taking great mid control, pinching into A, just isolating the CTs and burying them down and keeping the economy low. And they also won both pistols and converted the 3 rounds after, which is the typical winning formula. Moving into Mirage, my overall feeling is that neither of these games were super remarkable. We didn't see really anything super interesting tactically or insane individual performances, at least not really like super insane, like highlight worthy stuff, at least in my opinion. If you look at the box score, I think you see a very simple tale. On both of their wins, Big won both their pistol rounds and converted the early game thereafter. And as I've hammered home many times, that is one of the highest percentage formulas to win in Counter-Strike right now. There's not enough time to develop your economy on either side if you're losing 5 rounds at the beginning of each half. That's not enough time to work with. So in the first half on Mirage, Passion go down 0-6 before they can get a round on the board. And to their credit, they win out the rest of the half themselves. Some really good takes around mid and A, and even though they were going into the second half with momentum, they needed that pistol round to really continue to capitalize. Losing the pistol, being unable to force buy on second, losing the third is the #1 recipe for losing a game on the CT economy in the second half. You're just too far behind. And even though they got some sporadic rounds afterwards, they were never really able to break the economy of Big in a major way, and that meant the momentum was always against them. Combine that with great performances out of Rigon, JDC, Tabson, and Searson, and that's just going to go against Passion every time. This is a young team, so I give them a lot of leeway here. They have a lot more room to still make it into the major. They had a great opportunity against Big, and they're not really going to get much of a better one unless some team flukes their way against G2 or Spirit or Virtus Pro. Passion now has to capitalize and win a legit game against a top 15 or better team if they want to make it to the major, and I think they can do it. They show great raw fundamentals, but at the end of the day, like I said in the beginning, they're green. The question is, will they be able to use that to their advantage, or will it sink them? In our first elimination game, we have TSM taking on Paravision. And this is one of those bits in the video where I like sardonically talk to you directly and let you guys know that you don't care about these teams. I don't care about these teams. Does anybody really care if we just like, whoop, over to the next series? Because these are 2 of the worst teams at the event. Like, they're not going to do anything. I don't care how bad G2 or Spirit are on my most homicidal day. TSM is not beating them. Unless, like, the moon falls into orbit and destroys the planet. And seeing as I don't even believe the moon is real to begin with, I believe the odds are in my favor. Yeah, they beat Paravision. Congrats. This was a nothing series. Next up, we have the biggest disappointment since my parents realized my choice in career path. We have G2 losing to 3D Max. And this was a classic G2 loss. You know why? Because G2 stomped them on Anubis, then 3D Max rolled them over on Dust 2 and Ancient. And what happened? Well, Snacks outfragged m0NESY for the series. Let's go ahead and start there. I'm no expert, but I believe if we consult my table of theoretical physics, the #1 rule for stabilization in the quantum timeline is m0NESY has to be better than Snacks. The other cardinal mistake G2 made here was thinking they were safe against a French team on Dust 2. I'm going to tap the sign one more time here. Guys, what do I always say? Don't play the French on Dust 2. I don't care how good you are on Dust 2. You're inviting chaos to be a ladder when you put the French on Dust 2. And Maka ran over G2. m0NESY bottom fragged on Dust 2 to the tune of 5 and 14. Now listen, that's not going to happen often, but it happened here, and it was really painful that it did, because Nico was the only positive player on G2, and when G2 aren't fragging, they literally have nothing else. And the other thing about French Counter-Strike, as already alluded to, when they get hot, they stay hot. And Lucky went absolutely nuclear on Ancient to the tune of 29 kills, a 1.95 rating, and 120 ADR. Meanwhile, you got good games out of Malbs and Nico, but only just an okay one out of m0NESY. And again, the G2 formula is the three of them performing a Chrysalis Dragon Ball fusion into an unholy fragging monster. And when the fusion misses and you get like the fat form out of them, G2 loses. And listen, is it a big deal? No, not really. G2 are not gonna likely, hopefully, please, God, please don't have me be wrong about this, are not going to blow the RMR or something. They're gonna get like a bad team in their next matchup and probably win. But 3D Max just outfragged them. Like, this was simple Counter-Strike. This was who's gonna bang each other's heads off, and 3D Max were shooting sharper. Which, it was entertaining, don't get me wrong, but it's like, damn, are we just like wrong about 3D Max, or were they on fire? And that's gonna be the interesting thing to follow as the major goes on. Alright, and I'm just gonna be straightforward about this next series. Astralis versus Bait. This was an elimination game, wasn't really that interesting. Bait did really well to win Mirage down the stretch, 13-11, but afterwards I really felt like Bait just didn't play that good at Counter-Strike, and it really is just an unfortunate reality that Astralis are so underpowered without Device that they still managed to keep it close. Astralis had to grind out a victory on Nuke 13-11, they had to grind out a victory on Ancient 13-9, and listen, Astralis survived destruction for now, but I can't help but feel as soon as they get a top 15 or better opponent, they're going to crumble. They're going to be folded like a lawn chair, they're going to get put on a poster. But I do have to just take a second and give KD some credit. He had a really nice ace on Nuke, and when you keep in mind that this man is recovering from like a severe mouse arm injury, he says he's recovering well, but it still was a injury that I think otherwise he would have sat out if it wasn't the major. For him to still be playing at like an adequate level, not saying he's playing amazing, but for him to still be like being effective, I think is really admirable. I was really harsh on Kaden because everything that happened with the Astralis move, and because it was really funny. Kaden is just also a guy who has this very abrupt and upfront personality, so it makes him kind of somebody that's fun to poke fun at when things go wrong. But he has a great legacy, a great career, and it's clear that Stabby, I can't believe I'm going to leave that in. I said Stabby off a reflex. I was going to say Stown and Yabby, but Stown and Yabby have such a good working relationship with him. Like, he clearly knows how to pilot these players, that again, if only Device was here, I think Astralis would have qualified easily, maybe even done some damage at the major. We saw that back at the Blast World Finals, that Astralis were kind of turning over a leaf. So I'm just disappointed. It's hard for me to analyze a essentially dead roster. Credit to Bro for playing good throughout this series, by the way. He is at least going to be able to go to hopefully another team if Astralis let him out of the dungeon. Fair enough. Alright guys, we're going to wrap it up there. Co-streaming later tonight, 8 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. If you're watching this video, come watch me react to the games. I'm tired. Shout out to my channel members, Justin, Jesse, Furley, Bubblesj, Milan Berta, and Dr. Cocktor. If you too want to become a channel member, you get a cool role in my Discord, and I will thank you for paying me money. Go ahead and do so. Link in the description. Once again, twitch.tv/LionHeartZ CS2, co-stream. See you guys later. Peace.